The dust of Salvation, Arizona, clung to everything. The weathered planks of the boardwalk, the tired faces of the townspeople, and especially to the worn denim skirt of Eliza Reed. She adjusted the leather strap of her satchel on her shoulder, its weight a minor discomfort compared to the thudding, rhythmic ache of her wooden leg against the hard-packed earth. It wasn't a fancy prosthetic. It was a simple, hand-carved piece of oak, a testament to her late husband's love and ingenuity. He had made it for her after the wagon accident that had taken both his life and her leg, a cruel twist of fate that had left her a widow at 24, with a small ranch and an even smaller hope. The late morning sun beat down, an unforgiving presence that bleached the sky and promised a sweltering afternoon. Eliza's face, framed by a practical bonnet, was smudged with dirt from the long journey. Her destination was the general store, but her true purpose was survival. The drought had parched her small pasture, and her few head of cattle were growing weak. She had come to sell the last of her preserved goods, dried jerky and jars of pickled vegetables, a desperate attempt to get enough cash for a new supply of feed and a few sacks of flour. As she hobbled past the saloon, the loud, raucous laughter of men spilled out onto the street. It was the kind of laughter that didn't hide its cruelty, and Eliza felt a familiar knot of dread in her stomach. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat of anxiety. She knew what they would see: a young woman alone, a widow, and a cripple. The trifecta of vulnerability in a place where weakness was a death sentence. She clutched a small, woven basket to her side, a useless shield against the world. Her gaze was fixed on the general store's door, just a few yards away. She could hear them now, the low murmurs, the whispered jokes. She didn't have to look to know they were staring at her. The sound of her wooden leg was a loud announcement, a look at me that she could never silence. She held her head high, a fragile defiance that had served her well so far. Just as she was about to reach the door, a man's voice, deep and resonant, cut through the air. "Well, look at that, boys. A one-legged woman on her way to town. Wonder what she's selling. A handful of luck." The laughter that followed was like a physical blow. Eliza stopped dead, her face flushing crimson. She took a deep breath, trying to push past the humiliation. But another voice, louder and even more mocking, followed. "Maybe she can give us a dance. A jig for a dime." Eliza turned, her eyes burning with a mix of shame and fury. Standing in the saloon doorway were three men, their grimy clothes and sun-scorched faces a stark contrast to the casual cruelty in their eyes. The one who had spoken was a large man with a handlebar mustache and a wide, arrogant grin. This was Garrett Stone. His reputation preceded him, a wealthy rancher known for his vast lands and even vaster ego. He was the kind of man who commanded respect through intimidation, not character. Eliza's voice was a whisper, but it carried the weight of her entire existence. "Please," she said, her voice shaking, "don't laugh at my wooden leg." The words hung in the air, a plea, a demand for basic human decency. For a brief moment, a flicker of silence fell over the street. Garrett Stone's eyes, a piercing blue, met hers. For a second, just a split second, she thought she saw a hint of something besides mockery, pity, shame. No, it was gone as quickly as it came. He threw his head back and let out a booming, theatrical laugh. It was a sound that echoed off the buildings, a sound designed to dominate and humiliate. "Don't laugh at your leg? Why, ma'am? That's the most interesting thing about you," he roared, a cruel smile stretching across his face. The other men joined in, their laughter a chorus of derision. Eliza felt her dignity crumble. Tears welled up in her eyes, hot and sharp, but she refused to let them fall. She turned on her heel, her wooden leg thudding heavily, a sound of defeat. She pushed the general store door open and disappeared inside, leaving the echoes of their laughter to chase her. Garrett watched her go, the mirth slowly fading from his face. His friends slapped his back, congratulating him on a good joke. But the words, "Please don't laugh at my wooden leg," resonated in his mind. He had said it as a joke, a way to show his friends he wasn't a soft man. But seeing her face, the raw pain in her eyes, it was more than he had bargained for. A flicker of something he hadn't felt in a long time, regret, twitched in the back of his mind. He pushed it away, calling for another round of whiskey. But the sound of her wooden leg, the thud, 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 was a persistent, unwelcome echo. The humiliation, however, was just the beginning. The drought, the meager profit from her goods, and the constant threat of losing her land were real and present dangers. Eliza knew that mockery was a small pain compared to the true fight for her survival. But as she stood in the dusty light of the general store, clutching her meager earnings, she knew that Garrett Stone's laugh had taken something from her, something she wouldn't easily get back: her pride. And in the rugged, unforgiving world of the Old West, pride was often all a person had. Eliza's journey back to her small homestead was a silent and grueling one. The sun was now a brutal hammer in the sky, and the miles of dusty trails seemed to stretch on forever. The humiliation from Garrett Stone's laughter still stung, a raw wound in her mind. But as she neared her ranch, the gnawing anxiety of her reality took over, pushing the memory to a secondary ache. The wooden leg, her constant companion, seemed heavier than ever. Her ranch was a simple two-room cabin built by her husband, nestled between a few sparse hills. The fences were in need of repair, and the small barn leaned precariously to one side. The most painful sight, however, was the pasture. The grass was a pale, brittle yellow, crackling under her boots. What little cattle she had left, 3 cows and a young calf, stood listlessly in the shade of a lone oak tree, their ribs stark beneath their hides. The first thing she did was check the well. Her heart was a frantic bird in her chest as she lowered the bucket, the rope unspooling with a dry, whispery sound. It hit the bottom with a disheartening clunk. No splash. She tried again, lowering it more slowly, listening for the sound of water. Nothing. Her throat constricted. The well, her only source of water, was dry. A wave of despair washed over her, cold and overwhelming. She had faced so much since her husband's death: the crippling loneliness, the endless physical labor, the scorn of her neighbors. But a dry well was different. It wasn't a problem she could solve with determination or hard work. It was a death sentence for her and her cattle. She sank to the ground, the dust rising around her, and for the first time since that terrible day she allowed herself to weep. Silent, hot tears tracked paths through the grime on her cheeks. The weight of her existence seemed to press down on her, an unbearable burden. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in fiery oranges and deep purples, a lone rider appeared on the horizon. Eliza, her eyes swollen and red, wiped her face with the back of her hand and stood up, her hand instinctively going to the rifle her husband had given her, which she kept leaning against the cabin wall. She wasn't an easy target. The rider dismounted a short distance from the cabin. It was Garrett Stone. Her blood ran cold. What was he doing here? Was he here to mock her further, to witness her despair up close? Garrett approached cautiously, his hat pulled low, his face unreadable in the fading light. He stopped a respectful distance away, his eyes scanning the parched land, the leaning barn, the exhausted cattle. His gaze finally settled on her, and for the first time Eliza saw something she hadn't expected: a deep, quiet shame. "I didn't mean to hurt you," he said, his voice stripped of its earlier arrogance. It was a simple statement, but it held the weight of a heavy admission. Eliza scoffed, a bitter sound. "Funny how you only realize that when you're not in front of an audience." Garrett flinched, but didn't argue. "You're right. It was a low thing to do. I'm not proud of it." He gestured vaguely to the land. "The drought's bad this year. I've heard you have it worse than most." Eliza said nothing, her silence a wall of distrust. She didn't want his pity. She didn't need his belated apology. He was a rich man playing at being a good Samaritan, a novelty that wouldn't last. "I know a fella who's a well digger," Garrett said, as if sensing her thoughts. "He's the best in the territory, can find water where there isn't any." Eliza's heart gave a painful lurch. The idea was a lifeline, but her pride, her fierce, battered pride, refused to grab it. "I don't need your charity, Mr. Stone. I can handle my own affairs." "It's not charity," he insisted, stepping closer. "It's an apology. A way to make things right. I'll pay for it. He can come tomorrow." Eliza hesitated, Her common sense warred with her pride. Her cattle were her life. Her land was her legacy. Could she let them die just to spite a man who had hurt her? No. Her husband would never have wanted that. Her survival was more important than her pride. She looked at him, her eyes searching his face for any hint of a lie. His expression was earnest, his gaze steady. He seemed a different man from the one in the saloon. "Why?" she asked, her voice quiet. "Why now?" Garrett looked down at his boots, shuffling his weight. That laugh. It didn't feel good. Seeing your face, I don't know. It was wrong. I want to make it right. Eliza's gaze softened slightly. This was a man struggling with his own conscience, a man who perhaps for the first time had been forced to confront the consequences of his casual cruelty. The world wasn't black and white, and maybe he wasn't either. "All right," she said, her voice barely audible. "Tell him to come, but I will pay you back every penny. I don't take handouts, sir." Garrett's face lit up with a flicker of relief. "You don't have to," he said. "Yes, I do," she said firmly. "Or there's no deal." He nodded, a silent acknowledgement of her strength. "All right, I'll make sure he gets here first thing tomorrow. You'll have water soon, Eliza." He turned and rode away, leaving her alone once more with the darkening sky and the quiet ranch. The threat of a dry well still loomed, but for the first time since that morning, a tiny spark of hope flickered inside her. The promise of water, and the faint, surprising possibility of human kindness. The next morning the sun rose with the same unforgiving ferocity, but for Eliza, the world seemed a little less bleak. True to his word, Garrett Stone arrived just after dawn, not alone, but with a wiry older man carrying a divining rod and a team of workers. The well digger, a quiet man named Silas, gave Eliza a respectful nod before getting to work. Garrett, meanwhile, stood a short distance away, his hands on his hips, watching the proceedings. Eliza felt a strange mix of gratitude and discomfort. It was one thing for him to send the men, but another for him to be here on her land, a constant reminder of the day before. The silence between them was thick with the unspoken. He didn't try to make conversation, nor did she. She went about her chores, mending a section of fence, her movements precise and deliberate. She could feel his eyes on her, a silent, persistent presence. After a few hours, Silas called out, "Found it!" and the men began to dig. The sound of their shovels hitting the earth was music to Eliza's ears. She felt the tension she had been carrying for weeks begin to slowly recede. Garrett finally approached her, breaking the tense quiet. "Silas is the best there is," he said, his voice low. "He won't stop until he finds water." Eliza simply nodded, not trusting herself to speak. "The work's hard," he continued, gesturing toward her wooden leg. "Shouldn't you take a break?" She stiffened. "I'm fine, Mr. Stone. I'm used to hard work." "I see that," he said, his gaze lingering on the faded scar at her knee. His tone was not of pity, but of a quiet, grudging admiration. I want to make sure you're all right." Eliza looked at him then, really looked at him. The arrogant rancher from the day before was gone. In his place was a man who seemed genuinely concerned, his eyes holding a depth she hadn't expected. The apology he had offered the day before felt more real now, a tangible thing in the presence of his quiet efforts. She saw the conflicted expression on his face. He was a man who had always been on top, who had never had to consider the struggles of others. Her vulnerability, her fierce independence, and her raw pain were something new to him, something that had cracked the shell of his arrogance. "Why are you staying?" she asked, the question escaping before she could stop it. Garrett hesitated, looking out at the sun-scorched hills. "I don't know, I guess I want to see this through, and I wanted to make sure you were okay." He met her gaze. "I'm not a cruel man, Eliza. Not by nature. I don't think before I speak sometimes." Eliza held his gaze, a flicker of something new, understanding, perhaps, passing between them. He was a man with a lot to learn, and she was a woman who had been forced to learn everything the hard way. They fell into a comfortable silence after that, a strange, unspoken accord forming between them. Eliza continued her work, and Garrett helped the men, his strong hands calloused from years of ranching. He worked with a quiet efficiency, his presence a steadying anchor in the chaos of her life. As evening approached and the well-diggers celebrated the gush of water that filled the bucket, Garrett and Eliza stood side by side, watching the precious liquid pour out. The sound was a triumph, a symphony of relief and new beginnings. "Thank you," Eliza said, her voice thick with emotion. You've done a lot for me." Garrett simply nodded, a small, humble smile on his face. "It's the least I could do. I'll send you the bill for the men." "No," Eliza said, surprising him. "Don't. Let's start with a clean slate. I'll pay you for the well, and we'll call the rest of it an apology." He looked at her, his eyes serious. "I'd like that, Eliza. A clean slate." And as the sun set on her small ranch, casting long shadows across the land, Eliza felt a burden lift from her heart. The pain of the humiliation was still there, but it was now tempered by a surprising new reality. The world wasn't as black and white as she had thought, and neither, it seemed, was Garrett Stone. The path ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel completely alone. The days that followed the new well were filled with a kind of desperate hope. Eliza spent every waking hour caring for her cattle, the new-found water a precious resource. She worked tirelessly, hauling buckets of water, mending fences, and nursing the thinnest of her animals. The physical labor was immense, a constant strain on her body, especially her remaining leg, which ached with a deep, persistent throb. Garrett Stone, to Eliza's surprise, continued to visit. He never stayed long, just long enough to check on the well and to see how she was faring. He brought with him a sense of purpose and a quiet, respectful demeanor that was a stark contrast to his initial arrogance. His visits were no longer an intrusion. They became a strange, comforting rhythm in her lonely life. During one of his visits, he found her struggling to lift a heavy sack of grain from her wagon. She had tried to do it herself, as she always did, her teeth gritted against the strain. Garrett dismounted his horse and was by her side in an instant. "Let me," he said, his voice gentle. Eliza hesitated, her pride still a formidable barrier. "I can manage." "I'm sure you can," he said, his blue eyes holding hers. "But you don't have to." Before she could protest further, he lifted the heavy sack with an ease that made her own struggles seem pathetic. He carried it to her barn and set it down, the dust puffing up around his boots. "The ranch is in rough shape," he said, his gaze sweeping over the dilapidated barn and the worn-out fences. It wasn't an insult. It was a simple observation of her reality. "I'm just one person, Mr. Stone," she said, her voice tight with defensiveness. "I know," he said softly, "but you're a good one, a brave one." He paused, a hint of vulnerability in his voice. "I'm still trying to make up for my mistake." He didn't need to elaborate. The memory of his laughter was a ghost between them, but now it was a ghost of a different kind, a reminder of a shared moment of pain and the slow, arduous process of healing. Eliza's defenses began to crumble. She looked at the man who had mocked her, who was now helping her with quiet dignity. She saw the sincerity in his eyes, the genuine desire to atone. "You've already helped enough," she said, her voice softer. "The well." It was everything. Garrett shook his head. "It's not enough, not for what I did." He stayed longer that day, helping her mend a section of the fence that had been falling apart for months. He worked with a quiet competence, his large hands surprisingly deft with the wire and hammer. He didn't try to talk about her past, her husband or her leg. He simply worked alongside her, a silent partner in her struggle. As they worked, he talked about his own ranch, a vast, thriving operation. He spoke of his cattle, his plans for expansion, and the constant battle against nature. He was a man of the land, a man who understood the rhythms of the seasons and the unforgiving nature of the West. Eliza found herself listening, captivated. He was a different person when he talked about his work, his voice filled with a passion she had never heard before. She saw a man who was more than just a wealthy rancher. She saw a man who was deeply connected to the land. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, they stood together, looking out at the mended fence, a small victory in a world of defeats. "It's better," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Thank you," she said, her gratitude genuine and heartfelt. He smiled, and for the first time it was a genuine, easy smile that reached his eyes. "You're a stubborn woman, Eliza Reed." She laughed, a small, weary sound. "I have to be." "I know," he said, his smile fading into a more somber expression. "I'm starting to see that." He left shortly after, the quiet thud of his horse's hooves fading into the evening. Eliza watched him go, a new feeling settling in her heart. It wasn't love, or even friendship yet. It was something more profound. It was a sense of respect, a mutual understanding of the hard, unyielding life they both led. The old wound of his laughter was still there, but now it was surrounded by a new, more complex reality. Garrett Stone was no longer just the man who had laughed at her. He was something else, something she couldn't yet define. A reluctant ally, a quiet confidant, a presence in her life she had never asked for, but now, surprisingly, was beginning to welcome. The fragile sense of peace on Eliza's ranch, a quiet world she had painstakingly built from the ashes of her sorrow, was shattered by a new and more insidious threat. The man's name was Silas Hemlock, a cruel and greedy land speculator from the east. He was not a man of the land, but a man of the ledger, and he had a reputation for buying up small, struggling ranches and forcing the owners out, often through dishonest means. He was a snake in the grass, a man who moved with a silent, menacing grace, and he had his eyes set on Eliza's land, a small but fertile piece of property that was strategically located. One afternoon, as Eliza was tending to her small garden, her hands in the rich, dark soil, a man on horseback appeared, his dark suit and polished boots a stark contrast to the dusty landscape. He introduced himself with a slick, practiced smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Eliza Reed? My name is Silas Hemlock. I hear you're in a bit of trouble. The drought, your husband's debts, and, well, the rumors of your situation." His eyes lingered on her leg, a cold, calculating look that made her skin crawl, a deliberate insult that was meant to disarm her. Eliza stiffened, her hand tightening on the handle of her hoe, her knuckles turning white. The hoe, a tool of sustenance, was now a weapon. "I don't know what you've heard, Mr. Hemlock, but my ranch is not for sale." She stood her ground, her gaze unwavering, a quiet defiance in her posture. "Everything is for sale," he said, his voice oily and condescending. "Especially for a woman on her own. I'm prepared to make a very generous offer. It's more than you'll get from anyone else, and it would save you a world of trouble. A woman like you, alone, with your unique challenges. You don't stand a chance against the forces of this world. Let me help you." She saw the implied threat in his words, a thinly veiled promise of a future filled with hardship and ruin. He was offering her money to avoid a fight she was sure she would lose, a battle against a man who used a different kind of weapon than the men of the West. "I am not interested," she said, her voice firm, a quiet strength resonating in her words. "I will not sell my home. This land was my husband's and it's mine now. It's not just a piece of property. It's a legacy. It's my home. I will not be bullied by men like you." Hemlock's smile vanished. "That's a mistake, Mrs. Reed. The West is no place for a woman who can't stand on her own 2 feet, literally." The words were a direct hit, a deliberate attempt to break her spirit. The insult was so blunt, so cruel, that it took her breath away. She stood her ground, her gaze unwavering. "I will not be bullied, Mr. Hemlock. Now please leave my property." He tipped his hat, the gesture an empty show of respect, a final act of cruelty. "You'll regret this, Mrs. Reed. You'll regret it when your debts come calling, and there's no one to help you." As he rode away, his dark figure a stark silhouette against the setting sun, Eliza felt a shiver of fear. He wasn't like Garrett Stone, whose cruelty was born of thoughtlessness, a casual arrogance that could be overcome. Hemlock's was a calculated, deliberate act, a cold, hard malice that promised to destroy her in 1,000 small, insidious ways. Just as she was gathering her composure, a familiar figure appeared on the horizon. Garrett Stone. He saw the grim expression on her face and the direction the other rider had taken. He dismounted, his face etched with concern, a stark contrast to the easy arrogance she had come to expect from him. "Who was that?" he asked, his voice low and serious. Silas Hemlock, she said, her voice shaking slightly. He wants to buy my land. Garrett's expression hardened. That snake. He's been circling this valley like a vulture. He buys up the land, forces the small ranchers out, and then sells it for 10 times the price. He's a menace. He preys on the vulnerable, the desperate, and the weak. He's the worst kind of man the West has to offer. He told me I would regret not selling, Eliza said, her voice tight with a mixture of anger and fear. He said this was no place for a woman who can't stand on her own 2 feet. Garrett's jaw tightened. He said that to you? His voice was dangerously low, a stark contrast to his usual tone. The casual arrogance he had once displayed was now replaced by a fierce, protective anger that was both surprising and comforting. Yes, she said quietly. He thinks because I'm alone, and I have this, she gestured to her leg, that I am an easy target. He sees me as nothing more than a broken woman. Garrett walked over to her and gently, respectfully, placed a hand on her shoulder. He's wrong, Eliza. You're the strongest person I know. You're stronger than any man I've ever met, and you've survived more than any of them ever will. And he won't get this land. I won't let him. I'll make sure he knows that he's picked a fight with the wrong woman. The words, a fierce promise, resonated in the silent afternoon. For the first time, Eliza felt a sense of protection, a feeling she hadn't experienced since her husband's death. It was a strange and powerful sensation, and she realized with a jolt that Garrett Stone was no longer just an acquaintance. He was becoming an ally. Thank you, Garrett, she said, using his first name for the first time. The sound felt natural, right? A quiet declaration of their new relationship. He squeezed her shoulder lightly before pulling his hand away. You don't need to thank me. He's a bully, and I've always hated bullies. Now, he said, his voice more cheerful, let's go check on your cattle. I brought some supplies from my own ranch, a few bales of hay. They're not much, but they'll help. As they walked towards the barn, the silence between them was no longer awkward or tense. It was a comfortable, easy silence, the kind that comes from a deep and mutual understanding. The shadow of Silas Hemlock still loomed, but now Eliza knew she wasn't alone in the fight. The weight on her shoulders, once unbearable, now felt a little lighter, shared. The threat of Silas Hemlock hung in the air like a coming storm. He wasn't a man who made idle threats, and Eliza knew he would use every tactic he had to get her land. The following days were filled with a tense anticipation, a feeling of being watched. She found herself checking her fences more often, and her rifle was always within arm's reach. Garrett, true to his word, became a constant, supportive presence. He didn't just bring supplies. He brought his time and his quiet strength. He would come by in the mornings, help her with the chores, and offer advice on her cattle, which had begun to look healthier thanks to the new well and his donated hay. He was becoming a partner in her struggle, a silent defender against the unseen forces that threatened her. One evening, a week after Hemlock's visit, Eliza was woken by a strange noise, a low, unfamiliar growl, followed by a frantic bleating from her sheep pen. Her heart leaped into her throat. She grabbed her rifle, her wooden leg thudding against the floorboards as she rushed outside. The sight that greeted her was her worst fear. A pack of coyotes had breached the fence, their eyes glinting in the moonlight. They were circling the small flock, a few of the sheep already injured. Eliza's breath hitched in her throat. She couldn't fight them alone. As she raised her rifle, a gunshot rang out sharp and loud from the darkness. A coyote yelped and fell, and the others, startled by the sound, scattered into the night. Garrett Stone appeared from the shadows, his rifle still smoking. He had been camped out on a ridge overlooking her ranch, a silent, unseen guardian. He walked toward her, his face grim. They're a persistent lot. I've been keeping an eye out. There's been a lot of coyote activity in the valley lately. Eliza lowered her rifle, her hands shaking. You were watching my ranch? She asked, her voice a whisper. He looked away, a hint of embarrassment in his posture. I didn't want him to try anything. He's not above trying to scare you off your land. Setting a fire, scaring the livestock, it's his way. Eliza was stunned into silence. He hadn't just offered to help. He had put himself in harm's way, staying up late to protect her from a threat she hadn't even known existed. The gesture was so profound, so selfless that it brought a lump to her throat. "You didn't have to do that, Garrett," she said, her voice thick with emotion. He finally met her gaze. "Yes, I did. I won't let him win. He thinks he can bully you because you're on your own. He's wrong, you're not on your own." The words hung in the air, a silent promise. The old Garrett Stone, the man who had laughed at her, was gone. In his place was a man who understood the true meaning of strength and loyalty. They spent the rest of the night repairing the fence, working side by side in the soft glow of the moon. The silence was comfortable now, a shared understanding between two people who were becoming more than just allies. They were becoming friends. As the first light of dawn streaked the sky, Garrett stood up, his body weary from the long night. "I should go," he said. "I have my own chores to do." Eliza looked at him, her heart full of gratitude. "Garrett," she said, her voice sincere, "thank you for everything." He smiled, a tired but genuine smile. "Any time, Eliza. You just have to tell me what you need." He rode away, leaving her alone with her small flock of sheep, safe for now. The threat of Silas Hemlock still loomed, but the fear was now tempered by a new feeling, the quiet, steady strength of a man who had gone from her greatest tormentor to her most unexpected defender. The old pain was fading, replaced by the surprising and powerful light of a new friendship. She was no longer just a disabled widow on a lonely ranch. She was Eliza Reed, a woman who, in the face of immense adversity, had found an unlikely ally in the most unexpected of places. And she wasn't alone. The presence of Garrett Stone on Eliza's ranch did not go unnoticed. Salvation was a small town, and gossip traveled faster than a stagecoach. The townsfolk, who had previously pitied or scorned Eliza, now watched with a mixture of confusion and curiosity. The man who had publicly humiliated her was now her most frequent visitor and a silent guardian of her land. One afternoon, as Eliza was in town picking up supplies, she was approached by a group of women. Their faces were a mix of concern and thinly veiled judgment. "Eliza," one of them, a woman named Martha, said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "We've all heard about your arrangement with Mr. Stone. Are you sure you're safe with him? He's not a man to be trifled with." Eliza felt a flicker of annoyance. "Garrett has been nothing but a gentleman. He's been helping me with my ranch, the fence." "Helping you?" another woman scoffed. "Or taking advantage of you? Men like him don't do things for nothing. He probably wants your land. Or worse." Eliza's face flushed with anger. "You don't know him," she said, her voice sharp. "You only know the man you saw in the saloon. The man he's been since then is different. He's been a friend." The women exchanged knowing glances. They didn't believe her. They saw her vulnerability, her loneliness, and they projected their own fears and prejudices onto her. They saw a crippled woman who was an easy mark for a wealthy, powerful man. "Just be careful, Eliza," Martha said, her tone a patronizing warning. "A one-legged woman can't outrun a man with a full set of feet, or a wicked mind." Eliza turned and walked away, her wooden leg thudding against the boardwalk, a loud and defiant rhythm. The cruelty of their words stung more than Garrett's had. His had been born of ignorance and arrogance. Theirs was born of a deeper, more insidious malice. When she returned to her ranch, she found Garrett waiting for her. He saw the grim expression on her face and the tight set of her jaw. "What's wrong?" he asked, his voice low with concern. She told him about the women in town, their gossip and their warnings. She didn't mention the cruel comment about her leg, but he seemed to understand it was there. Garrett's face hardened. "They're small-minded fools. They don't know the first thing about decency. They see what they want to see. A man like me helping a woman like you, it doesn't fit into their neat little world. It makes them uncomfortable." "Why does it matter so much?" she asked, her voice weary. "Why can't a person just be a good person without everyone trying to find a reason behind it?" "Because most people aren't good, Eliza," he said, his voice quiet. "And they can't understand someone who is. They can't understand what it's like to do the right thing when you don't have to." He sat down on the porch steps next to her, and for the first time he spoke about his own past. He told her about the loneliness of being a powerful man, about the way people tried to use him, to take advantage of his wealth. He had learned to be cynical, to be wary, to push people away before they could hurt him. The laugh in the saloon, he admitted, was a reflex, a way of keeping people at a distance, of proving he didn't care. "I spent my life building walls, Eliza," he said, his voice heavy with regret. "And you just walked right through them. With that damn wooden leg and that stubborn look in your eyes." He managed a small, weary smile. "And for the first time in a long time, I'm not lonely anymore." Eliza looked at him, and for the first time, she saw a man who was just as vulnerable as she was, but in a different way. A man who had built walls to protect himself just as she had. They were two lonely souls, finding a strange kind of comfort in each other's presence. "They'll talk," she said softly. "Let them," he said, his voice firm. "We know the truth, that's all that matters." And as the sun set on the horizon, painting the sky in a blaze of colors, Eliza felt a deep sense of peace. The town could gossip, Silas Hemlock could scheme, but she was not alone. She had a new kind of family, a family of two, built on an unexpected foundation of shared pain and growing respect. The world might be cruel, but it was also full of unexpected kindness, and she was beginning to see that it was the kindness that would always win. The fragile peace on Eliza's ranch was shattered by a stark and undeniable reality. A letter arrived from the bank in Salvation, a cold, formal notice of her husband's outstanding debts. It was a sum far larger than she had anticipated, a weight that had been silently accumulating, threatening to crush her. The notice gave her 30 days to pay or face foreclosure. Eliza sat on her porch, the letter trembling in her hands. The amount was astronomical. The money she had saved from selling her goods, plus the little she had left, wasn't even a fraction of what was owed. She had been so focused on the day-to-day struggle of survival that she had forgotten about the long-term threat. Just as the despair began to set in, Garrett Stone arrived. He saw the letter in her hand and the panicked look on her face. "What's wrong, Eliza?" he asked, his voice low. She showed him the letter, her hands shaking. He read it, his face growing grim with each line. "Silas Hemlock," he said, the name a curse on his lips. "He must have been the one to tip them off. He's trying to force you out." 30 days, Garrett," she said, her voice a cracked whisper. 30 days and I lose everything. My husband's home, my land, everything." Garrett's mind raced. He knew the debt was a mountain she couldn't climb alone. He had to help her. There was no other option. "I'll pay it," he said, his voice firm. Eliza shook her head, her eyes burning with tears. "No, I told you, I won't take your charity. I will find a way." "What way, Eliza?" he asked, his voice filled with a desperate urgency. "What can you possibly do in 30 days? You'll have to sell the ranch, and Hemlock will be waiting to buy it for a pittance." She looked away, her eyes fixed on the horizon. "There's an annual rodeo in Salvation. The prize money is enough to pay the debt." Garrett stared at her, dumbfounded. "The rodeo? Eliza, that's insane. The best riders from all over the territory compete in that. You can't—" He stopped himself, realizing the words were a judgment. "It's too dangerous, and you're not a rider." "My husband taught me," she said quietly, before the accident. "I was a good rider, Garrett. The best on our ranch." She looked at him, a fierce determination in her eyes. "I can do this. I have to. It's the only way." Garrett was torn. He saw the desperate hope in her eyes, the last-ditch effort of a woman who had nowhere else to turn. He knew it was a foolish, dangerous plan, but he also knew he couldn't stop her. Her pride, her fierce independence, was a part of who she was. "All right," he said, his voice heavy with resignation. "If you're going to do this, you're not doing it alone. I'll help you. I'll teach you. My horses are the best in the territory. We'll train you. We'll get you ready." Eliza looked at him, her eyes widening with surprise. "You'll help me?" "Yes," he said, his voice firm. "We'll show them. We'll show Hemlock. We'll show the whole damn town. We'll show them that a one-legged widow can do anything she sets her mind to." The words were a powerful declaration, a promise of a partnership that was no longer just about survival, but about a shared mission. Eliza, for the first time in months, felt a flicker of genuine hope. It was a crazy idea, a dangerous one, but with Garrett by her side it didn't feel impossible. It felt like a chance, a last desperate chance at a new beginning. She knew it would be a long, difficult road, but she also knew she was no longer alone on it. The first day of training was a humbling experience for Eliza. She had been a skilled rider in her youth, but her body was now different. Her wooden leg was a constant, unforgiving presence, a reminder of her limitations. Garrett led her to his sprawling ranch, a place of immense beauty and order. The horses were magnificent, powerful animals with a wild grace. He chose a gentle but strong mare for her, a beautiful roan named Liberty. Eliza's first attempt to mount the horse was clumsy and awkward. Her wooden leg was a stubborn obstacle, refusing to bend and adjust to the stirrup. Garrett watched in silence, his face a mask of patience. He didn't offer to help, he simply watched, allowing her to struggle. He knew that for her this was a matter of pride. She had to do it on her own. After several frustrating attempts, she finally managed to hoist herself onto the saddle, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The feeling was exhilarating but also terrifying. Her balance was off and her body felt alien and unwieldy. "All right," Garrett said, his voice calm and steady. "Now, hold the reins. Don't grip them too tight. You're part of her, not her master." He spent the rest of the morning teaching her, his instructions clear and concise. He taught her how to compensate for her lost leg, how to use her core and her remaining leg to shift her weight and balance. He was a patient and skilled teacher, and his quiet confidence was a soothing balm to her frayed nerves. Eliza pushed herself harder than she ever had before. Her muscles ached, and the stump of her leg was a constant, throbbing pain. But she didn't complain. She couldn't. This was her last chance. She thought of the letter from the bank, of Silas Hemlock's cruel smile, and she pushed the pain aside. As the days turned into a week, Eliza began to feel a familiar rhythm returning. The mare Liberty was a kind and intelligent animal, and she seemed to sense Eliza's struggle, adjusting her pace and her movements to accommodate her. The two of them, the woman with the wooden leg and the gentle horse, began to move as one. Garrett watched her progress with a growing sense of awe. He had never seen a person with such a fierce will, such an unbreakable spirit. He had expected her to give up, to admit defeat, but she never did. She fell, she stumbled, she ached, but she always got back up. One afternoon, as she was practicing a difficult maneuver, she fell hard, her wooden leg getting caught in the stirrup. Garrett was by her side in an instant, his face pale with fear. "Eliza, are you all right?" he asked, his voice filled with genuine concern. She lay on the ground, her body a tangle of limbs. "I'm fine," she said, her voice raspy. She winced as she tried to get up, a sharp pain shooting through her leg. Garrett knelt beside her, his hands hovering over her, unsure of what to do. "Let me help you," he said gently. She shook her head, her face a mask of determination. "No, I can do it. I have to do it." She slowly, painstakingly, pushed herself up. Garrett watched, a profound respect in his eyes. He had seen strong men break under less pressure, but Eliza, the woman he had once laughed at, was as strong as they came. As she dusted herself off, he spoke, his voice low with admiration. "You are the most stubborn person I have ever met, Eliza Reed." She smiled a small, weary smile. "Good," she said, her eyes shining with unshed tears of pain and triumph. "I hope so." He didn't say anything, but he helped her back onto the horse, his hands steady and gentle. He knew then that the rodeo wasn't just about prize money. It was about something much bigger. It was about a woman reclaiming her life, her dignity, and her future. And he was honored to be a part of it. The impossible task was now a little less impossible, and the desperate hope was a little bit brighter, fueled by the quiet strength of two unlikely allies. Word of Eliza's training with Garrett spread through Salvation like wildfire. The initial gossip about their arrangement was now replaced by a different kind of speculation. Was the crippled widow really going to enter the rodeo? Was Garrett Stone helping her for an ulterior motive, or was he a changed man? The town was divided. Some mocked her, seeing her attempt as a desperate, foolish stunt. Others, mostly the older, wiser members of the community, watched with a quiet, cautious hope. Eliza felt the weight of their scrutiny every time she rode into town for supplies. The whispers, the glances, they were a constant reminder of the high stakes she was playing for. But her focus was unwavering. She lived and breathed the rodeo. Her days began before sunrise and ended long after sunset, all spent on horseback, her body pushed to its physical and emotional limits. One morning, as she was practicing a difficult turn, she was startled by the arrival of a small, dusty wagon. An elderly woman, her face a roadmap of wrinkles, stepped out, a basket of freshly baked bread in her hands. It was Martha, the woman who had warned her about Garrett. Eliza stiffened, expecting a fresh round of judgment, but Martha's expression was different. It was filled with a humble and quiet apology. "Eliza," she said, her voice softer than Eliza had ever heard it. "I wanted to apologize for what I said. I was a fool, a meddling old woman. I saw a powerful man and a vulnerable woman, and I let my fear get the best of me. But I've been watching you." Her gaze settled on Eliza's leg, not with pity, but with a profound and grudging respect. "You have more grit in that one leg than most men have in their whole bodies." She handed Eliza the basket. "My husband, he's a blacksmith. He heard you were training. He said to tell you he'd be happy to make a new stirrup, one that would fit your situation better. On the house." Eliza was stunned. She had expected judgment, but she received an olive branch. The quiet act of kindness, the unspoken solidarity, brought tears to her eyes. More acts of generosity followed. The general store owner gave her a discount on grain, a tacit blessing on her endeavor. The local doctor, an old grizzled man with a kind heart, stopped by to check on her, offering advice on how to manage the pain in her leg. The community was not as monolithic as she had thought. It was a tapestry of individuals, some cruel, some kind, and some simply waiting to be shown a reason to believe. Garrett watched it all with a quiet satisfaction. He saw the pride in Eliza's eyes as she accepted the help, not as charity, but as a sign of respect. He knew that for Eliza, this was more than just a rodeo. It was a chance to prove herself, not just to the town, but to herself. One evening, as they were sitting on the porch, a comfortable silence stretching between them, Eliza looked at him. I never thought the people in this town could be this kind. I thought they had all judged me." "Most people want to be good, Eliza," Garrett said, his voice quiet. "They just need to be shown the way. You're showing them. You're showing them that strength isn't about how many legs you have, but about how much heart." The words hung in the air, a profound truth. The community was not just watching, they were rallying behind her. The support was not a loud, boisterous thing. It was a series of quiet, heartfelt gestures, a basket of bread, a new stirrup, a discount on grain. Each one was a thread in a new kind of fabric, a community being rewoven by an unlikely hero. And in the heart of that community was a disabled widow who was proving that she was anything but weak. The days before the rodeo were a blur of intense training and growing anxiety, a high-stakes countdown to the most important event of her life. Eliza was now a confident rider, her movements with liberty fluid and practiced, a seamless harmony between woman and horse. She had learned to trust the mare's powerful strides and quick turns, and in doing so, she had learned to trust herself. But the pressure was immense. Her entire future, the fate of her ranch, and her very dignity rested on her performance. Garrett, ever the pragmatic one, made sure she was not just a skilled rider, but a competitor with a strategic mind. He taught her about the rules of the rodeo, the nuances of the judges' preferences, and the psychology of her opponents. They spent hours talking through every potential scenario, every possible contingency, turning a simple athletic competition into a game of high-stakes chess. The tension reached a fever pitch at the final registration. The town was buzzing with excitement. Crowds of people lined the streets, all of them eager to see the spectacle. The registration tent was a hive of activity, filled with the best riders from the territory, all of them confident, boisterous, and full of bravado. The air was thick with their competitive energy. The sound of their laughter and easy conversation, a stark contrast to the churning anxiety in Eliza's stomach. Eliza, in her simple riding clothes, stood out like a sore thumb. Her practical, worn-in clothes were a stark contrast to the flashy embroidered chaps and polished spurs of her competitors. Her wooden leg was a stark contrast to the strong, agile legs of the men around her, a visible mark of her vulnerability in a world that rewarded physical perfection. She felt a familiar knot of anxiety in her stomach, the same tight, painful feeling she had the day she first hobbled down the main street. But this time, Garrett was by her side, a silent, steady presence that grounded her. He stood tall and unyielding, a human shield against the judging eyes of the crowd. As she signed her name on the registration form, her hand trembling slightly, a shadow fell over her. It was Silas Hemlock, his face a mask of condescending amusement. He had a riding crop in his hand, a prop of his wealth and power, and his gaze was fixed on her leg, a cruel and deliberate insult. "Well, well, Mrs. Reed," he said, his voice a low, mocking drawl that was meant for her ears alone. "I see you've decided to make a fool of yourself. Trying to win the money to pay your debts, are you? A little pathetic, don't you think?" His words were a poison dart, a direct hit at her most profound insecurities. Eliza's hand tightened on the pen, her knuckles turning white with the effort to control her emotions. She refused to look at him, her gaze fixed on the paper, a silent protest against his cruelty. She would not give him the satisfaction of seeing her break. "She's not here to make a fool of herself, Hemlock," Garrett said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble that cut through the noise of the tent. He stepped in front of Eliza, his broad shoulders a shield between her and the man who threatened her. The action was not just protective, it was a clear statement of his allegiance. Hemlock's smirk faltered for a moment. He had not expected Garrett to be so openly protective, to stand up for a woman he had once ridiculed. "Garrett Stone," he said, his tone turning to one of feigned sympathy, a cruel theatricality. "Helping a lost cause, are we? You should save your pity for someone who can actually stand on her own 2 feet." The words were a direct hit. Eliza felt her anger flare, a hot, uncontrollable fire that chased away the cold fear. She looked at Hemlock, her eyes burning with a fierce defiance. She had faced him once before, and she would not back down now. "My feet are just fine, mister." "Hemlock," she said, her voice clear and strong, a testament to her newfound resolve. "And I don't need your pity. I'm here to compete, and I'm going to win." Hemlock's smile vanished, replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated fury. "We'll see about that," he said, his voice a cold threat that promised a hidden menace. "There are a lot of ways to lose a rodeo, Mrs. Reed. A lot of ways to get hurt. An accident here, a sprained ankle there. Things happen." He turned and walked away, leaving a chilling silence in his wake. Eliza's hands were shaking. She had faced down bullies before, but Hemlock was a different kind of monster. He was a man who used fear as a weapon, and she knew he wouldn't hesitate to use it against her, no matter how low or cruel the act. Garrett placed a hand on her shoulder, his touch grounding and reassuring, a silent communication of his strength. "He's all talk, Eliza. He's trying to get in your head. Don't let him. Don't let him distract you from your goal." "He's not all talk, Garrett," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "He's a snake, and he'll do anything to win. He'll stop at nothing to get what he wants." Garrett looked at her, his eyes serious and unwavering. "Then we'll be ready for him. We're in this together, and he won't stand a chance. We'll fight him with honor, with skill, and with everything we have." The rodeo had now become more than just a competition. It was a final showdown. A test of wills. A battle for her home, her dignity, and her future. And in that moment, as she stood beside the man who had once laughed at her, she knew that she was ready for the fight. She was ready to face not just her opponents, but the very man who had tried to break her. The day of the rodeo dawned with a clear, merciless sky, a vast dome of indifferent blue. The air, typically clean and fresh on the high plains, was now thick with the scent of dust, horses, and a nervous, charged energy that crackled like static electricity. The stands were packed, a sea of faces waiting for the spectacle to begin, their collective anticipation a heavy weight in the arena. The arena itself was a cauldron of noise, with riders warming up their horses, the rhythmic thud of hooves on packed dirt, and the announcer's voice booming over the commotion, a disembodied voice that seemed to mock the tension in the air. Eliza felt a wave of nausea, a cold, sickening lurch in her stomach. Her heart was a frantic drum against her ribs, a wild, panicked rhythm that she couldn't control. She was surrounded by men who had been riding their entire lives, men with strong bodies and an arrogant confidence that she could never hope to match. They were the knights of this kingdom, and she was a lone, vulnerable peasant. She was an outsider, a woman with a wooden leg, a symbol of vulnerability in a world that rewarded strength and ruthless dominance. Every stare felt like a judgment, every whispered word a cruel taunt. Garrett was by her side, his presence a calming anchor in the chaos. He was a rock in the churning sea of her anxiety. He helped her saddle Liberty, his movements slow and deliberate, a practiced ritual that was as much about calming her as it was about preparing the horse. "Breathe, Eliza," he said, his voice low and steady, cutting through the noise like a sharp blade. "You've trained for this. You know what to do. Forget the crowd. Forget the other riders. It's just you and Liberty out there. You two are a team, and you're the best team here. You're the best team because your bond isn't just about speed, it's about trust. It's about a relationship built on a foundation of respect and understanding." His words, a mix of tough love and quiet reassurance, helped to calm her nerves. She took a deep breath, the dusty air filling her lungs, her gaze fixed on the arena. The first event was a barrel race, a test of speed and agility. It was her best event, a test of her and Liberty's bond, and her ability to navigate the turns with precision. As her name was called, a hush fell over the crowd. A few people clapped, a scattered, polite sound, but most just stared, their faces a mix of morbid curiosity and profound doubt. Eliza ignored them. She mounted Liberty, her movements now second nature, a fluid and practiced rhythm that she had performed 1,000 times in the quiet of her own ranch. She took her place at the starting line, her hands light on the reins, her mind a blank slate of focus. "Go!" The announcer's voice boomed, and the world seemed to fall away. Eliza spurred Liberty forward, the mare surged ahead, a powerful engine of muscle and grace. Eliza focused on her balance, her body shifting with every turn, every subtle movement of the horse. The wooden leg was a challenge, a constant reminder of her past, but she had learned to use it as a kind of rudder, a counterweight to her body's movements. It was no longer a hindrance, it was a part of her, a tool she had mastered. She felt the wind in her hair, the rhythmic thunder of Liberty's hooves against the earth. For a moment she forgot about the crowd, the debt, and Silas Hemlock. She was a rider again, a woman in perfect harmony with her horse, a single moving unit of power and grace. She rounded the last barrel, her time a blur in her mind. She crossed the finish line, and the crowd erupted in a mix of confused silence and a few scattered claps. She had done it. She had completed the run without a single mistake, a flawless performance that defied all expectations. Garrett met her at the gate, a proud, relieved smile on his face. "That was perfect, Eliza, perfect." He helped her dismount, his hands gentle on her arm. "What was my time?" she asked, her voice a breathless whisper, her heart still pounding with adrenaline. "Good," he said, a glint of triumph in his eyes. "Very good. You're in the running. And that's all that matters right now." The rest of the day was a blur of competition. The other riders were fast, but they made mistakes. A few hit the barrels, adding precious seconds to their time. Eliza's run, while not the fastest, was flawless. As the first round ended, the announcer's voice boomed over the crowd, a clear, resonant sound that cut through the noise. "And the leader of the barrel race, with the best time and a flawless run, is Eliza Reed." A stunned silence fell over the arena, followed by a roar of applause. It was a mix of surprise and genuine admiration. Eliza looked at Garrett, a look of pure, unadulterated shock on her face. She had won the first round. She had done the impossible. Garrett's smile was wide and proud. "I told you, Eliza," he said, his voice filled with emotion. "I told you you could do it." The victory was small, but it was a monumental one. It was a victory not just against her opponents, but against every doubt, every prejudice, and every cruel word that had ever been spoken to her. She had won the first round, but the real test was yet to come. She had to stay on top, or everything she had worked for would be for nothing. But for a moment, just a single glorious moment, she was not the disabled widow. She was a winner. She was a champion. The victory was short-lived. The moment the celebratory cheers for Eliza's stunning performance faded, a new, more sinister kind of tension took over the air, thick and palpable. Eliza's win had done more than just put her in the lead. It had made her a target. The camaraderie of the rodeo, a fragile thing at the best of times, evaporated instantly, replaced by a cutthroat competitiveness. She felt the eyes of the other riders on her, a mix of grudging respect and seething resentment. It was a silent, chilling hostility, the kind that promised an unseen reckoning. As she and Garrett walked Liberty back to the stables, a man, one of the top riders, a large, burly man with a reputation for playing dirty, blocked their path. His name was Jed, and his face was a portrait of sullen fury. He stood with his arms crossed, a mountain of belligerence. "Lucky run, ma'am," he said, his voice a low, ugly growl that was meant to be intimidating. He spat a stream of tobacco juice on the ground near her feet. "Beginner's luck. I bet you won't be so lucky in the next round. You and your little friend." His eyes flickered to Eliza's wooden leg, a sneer twisting his lips into a mask of contempt. The insult was a deliberate, vicious stab at her deepest vulnerability. Garrett, ever watchful, stepped forward, his body a silent threat. He was a man who understood the unspoken language of dominance and violence, and he was fluent in it. "That's enough," he said, his voice hard, a low warning that brooked no argument. "You have something to say, you say it to me. Leave the lady out of it." Jed, seeing the cold, unyielding fire in Garrett's eyes, backed down, but his own eyes promised a different kind of retribution. He was a coward who preyed on the weak, and Garrett was anything but weak. Eliza felt a chill run down her spine. She had faced down verbal abuse before, but this was different. This was a direct physical threat. The next round, the pole bending, was even more demanding than the barrel race. It required even more precision and speed, and a single mistake could cost her the competition. A single mistake or a calculated act of sabotage. That evening, as Garrett was helping her care for Liberty, his movements were more watchful than usual, his face a grim mask of concern. "I don't like it," he said, his voice filled with a quiet unease. "That man, I know his type. He's not above doing something stupid to get the upper hand. He sees you as a threat, and he'll do anything to eliminate you." "What could he do?" Eliza asked, her voice tight with worry. She felt a new kind of fear creeping in, a fear that was 1,000 times worse than the fear of public humiliation. Garrett sighed, his gaze on the mare, his hands gently running over her legs, checking for any signs of injury or tampering. "A lot of things. A cut stirrup, a loose saddle, a little something to spook the horse. He'll want to get you out of the competition, and he knows just where to hit you. He knows you're a woman alone. He knows you have no one to protect you, or at least that's what he thinks." The thought was a cold, hard stone in her stomach. She had trusted Garrett, but now a new kind of fear was setting in, the fear of an unseen enemy, a malicious force that she couldn't fight with her own two hands. Garrett stayed with her long after nightfall, a silent guardian, his presence a constant reassurance in the growing darkness. But as the night wore on, his own ranch needed him. He had men waiting for him, and he couldn't stay forever. "I have to go, Eliza," he said, his voice filled with a reluctant regret. "But I'll be back before dawn. Just be careful. Don't go anywhere near Liberty. Don't do anything with the tack. Let me check it all in the morning. He won't be expecting you to be on guard. He'll think you're in your cabin sleeping. Use that to your advantage." She nodded, her heart heavy with fear. He rode off, and the silence of the night settled around her, a lonely and menacing presence. She tried to sleep, but her mind was racing, her thoughts filled with the image of a broken saddle, a loosened girth, a calculated act of cruelty. She tossed and turned, the fear a physical weight on her chest. Finally, she gave up on sleep and lit a lamp, grabbing a heavy blanket. She was going to stay up all night by Liberty's side, a silent guard against the unseen forces that sought to destroy her. She sat on a bale of hay, her rifle in her lap, her eyes fixed on the stable door, a sentinel in the darkness. The night stretched on, a long, anxious vigil. The silence of the barn was broken only by the soft sounds of the horses shifting in their stalls, the rustling of their hay. She didn't dare to even go to the outhouse, afraid to leave her post for even a moment. Just as the sky began to lighten with the first hint of dawn, she heard it, a soft, scraping sound, a figure in the shadows, moving stealthily toward Liberty's stall. Her heart leaped into her throat, a frantic bird. She raised her rifle, her hands shaking, her mind a blank slate of fear. "Stop," she said, her voice a cracked whisper that was barely audible in the silence. The figure froze. A match was lit, and in its small flickering light she saw the face of the burly rider from the day before. He had a knife in his hand and a look of surprise and rage on his face. He lunged at her, and in that moment, all her training, all her fear, all her courage came to a single explosive point. The man lunged at her, a low growl escaping his lips, a feral sound that was meant to instill terror. Eliza didn't think. She acted. Her years of living alone, of protecting herself and her small homestead, came to the forefront. Her mind, honed by hardship and solitude, was a whirlwind of instinct and training. She raised her rifle, not to shoot, but to use it as a club, a heavy, unyielding barrier between her and the man. The moonlight glinted off the barrel as she swung it hard, its heavy butt hitting him squarely in the chest with a sickening thud. The blow was a testament to her strength, a force she had built through years of hard labor on the ranch. He staggered back with a pained grunt, his knife clattering to the dusty floor of the barn, a small, impotent sound in the vast silence. "Get out!" she screamed, her voice a raw, primal sound of fury that echoed off the wooden beams. "Get out of my stable!" He glared at her, his eyes filled with a murderous rage that was now mixed with a bitter, defeated surprise. He was bigger, stronger, and in the close confines of the barn her rifle was more of a hindrance than a help. But she had caught him off guard. He had expected an easy mark, a scared, one-legged woman who would cower and surrender. He had not expected a force of nature, a woman who would fight with a fierce, unyielding resolve. He lunged again, but this time a new sound filled the air, the thunder of hooves, fast and furious, and the sound of a man's angry roar. Garrett Stone rode into the barn, his face a mask of furious determination, a dark, avenging angel on horseback. He had seen the man sneaking out of town and had a bad feeling, a gut instinct that told him something was wrong. He had galloped all the way back, pushing his horse to its limits, the rhythmic pounding of its hooves a desperate race against time. The man saw him, his eyes widening in a mixture of fear and rage. He knew he was outnumbered and outmatched. He scrambled for his knife, but Garrett was faster. He dismounted with a fluid grace, his movements a blur of controlled power, and with a single brutal punch he sent the man sprawling into a pile of hay. The man crumpled, a heap of defeat and pain. "Get out," Garrett said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble that was filled with an implicit promise of violence. "And if I ever see your face in this town again, I'll bury you myself." The man, bruised and defeated, scrambled to his feet and ran out of the barn, disappearing into the darkness, a coward who had met his match. Eliza stood there, her body trembling with adrenaline, her rifle still clutched in her hands. The fight was over, but the aftermath was a wave of physical and emotional exhaustion. Garrett turned to her, his face filled with a mixture of anger and profound relief. He saw her shaking hands, her pale face, and the fierce fire in her eyes. "Eliza," he said, his voice softening as he saw her. He walked toward her and gently took the rifle from her shaking hands, his touch a gentle, reassuring balm. "You're safe now. You're safe." She sank to the ground, her body weak with the aftermath of the fight. The tears, which she had held back for so long, finally came hot and fast, a flood of pent-up fear and relief. She had been so close to losing everything, so close to being hurt, or worse. Garrett knelt beside her, his arms going around her, pulling her into a tight, comforting embrace. She didn't resist. She buried her face in his chest, her sobs muffled against his shirt. He was solid, real, a rock in the chaos of her life. "I told you I'd be back," he said, his voice gentle and full of emotion. "I won't let anyone hurt you. Not ever again. I won't let him or anyone else come near you." She held on to him, her body shaking. In that moment, the old him, the man who had laughed at her, was a distant memory. The man holding her was her protector, her confidant, her partner. They had faced down a physical threat together, and in doing so, they had forged a bond that was stronger than steel, a silent promise of loyalty and trust. The long night finally ended. The sun rose, a new day dawning on a world that was both more dangerous and more hopeful than she had ever known. Eliza was safe, her horse was safe, and her chance at winning the rodeo, at securing her future, was still alive. She had faced down a bully, a literal villain, and had won. The community, the rodeo, and the future was still a wild card. But for now, as she sat in the quiet of the barn, a silent partner by her side, she felt a quiet strength she had never known before. She was not just a disabled woman, she was a survivor. The final day of the rodeo was a spectacle, a grand theatrical climax to a week of fierce competition and unexpected drama. The entire town of Salvation, along with ranchers from miles around, had come to watch. The air was thick with anticipation, the buzz of 1,000 conversations, a low hum beneath the bright, unforgiving sun. Eliza's win in the first round and the harrowing tale of her midnight showdown had made her a folk hero, a symbol of hope and defiance. The crowd wasn't just watching a competition, they were watching a story unfold, and they were desperate for a happy ending. They were no longer a skeptical, judgmental audience. They were a cheering, supportive fan base, their cheers a powerful wind at her back. As Eliza prepared for the final round, the pole-bending event, she felt a profound change within herself. The fear was still there, a ghost of the woman she used to be, but it was now a distant hum, a low note beneath the fierce, burning fire of her determination. She had faced down a man who had tried to hurt her and her horse, and she had won. Her courage had been tested and proven, not just in a rodeo, but in a life-or-death situation. The arena, with its cheering crowds and its dusty ground, felt less like a threat and more like a stage where she could finally show the world what she was made of. Garrett was by her side, his face a mask of quiet intensity. He checked Liberty's tack one last time, his movements meticulous and precise, a silent, comforting ritual. "No funny business this time," he said, his voice low and serious. "I have men watching every stall. Nothing's getting through. He won't get a second chance to hurt you." Eliza nodded, her gaze fixed on the arena. The poles stood like sentinels, a long, winding course that she and Liberty had to navigate with speed and grace. A single mistake, a knocked-over pole, would cost her precious seconds and quite possibly the competition. Her name was called. The crowd erupted in a roar of encouragement. Eliza took a deep breath, her heart a steady drum against her ribs. She mounted Liberty, her movements fluid and confident, a graceful dance of rider and horse. She rode to the starting line, her eyes meeting Garrett's. He gave her a small, encouraging nod, a silent message of faith and support. "Go!" The announcer's voice boomed. Eliza spurred Liberty forward. The mare leaped into a gallop, her hooves a rhythmic thunder against the earth. Eliza's body was a part of her, a single, moving unit. Her wooden leg, once a hindrance, was now a source of her unique balance, a counterweight that she had learned to use to her advantage. She wove Liberty through the first set of poles, her body shifting with every turn, her mind a focused, unwavering laser. She felt the powerful surge of the mare beneath her, the animal a willing partner in her quest for victory. She heard the crowd's roar, a wave of sound that rose and fell with every turn. She was not just riding, she was performing, a dance of precision and power, a living embodiment of courage and resilience. She felt the wind whipping at her face, the exhilaration of the ride, the profound connection to the animal beneath her, a silent communion of two hearts beating as one. As she rounded the final pole, she leaned into the turn, her body a perfect complement to Liberty's. The horse responded, her muscles bunching and releasing with a powerful surge of speed. They crossed the finish line in a blur of motion, the crowd erupting in a deafening roar that was a mix of pure joy and profound admiration. Eliza pulled Liberty to a stop, her chest heaving, her body tingling with adrenaline. She had done it. She had completed the run without a single mistake. She felt a profound sense of triumph, a victory that was 1,000 times sweeter than anything she had ever imagined. The announcer's voice boomed over the crowd. And the final time for Eliza Reed is a new rodeo record. A stunned silence fell over the arena, followed by a roar of pure, unadulterated awe and respect. The crowd, which had once been a sea of skepticism, was now a sea of believers. They stomped their feet, they clapped, they whistled, their cheers a symphony of celebration. Eliza, her heart swelling with emotion, dismounted Liberty, a wide, triumphant smile on her face. Garrett was there, his eyes shining with a mix of pride and relief. "You did it, Eliza," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You did it. You showed them all. You're a champion." She looked at him, and in that moment, she knew that the victory was not just hers, it was theirs. They had faced down the doubts, the threats, and the physical limitations, and they had won. She had proven to the town, to Silas Hemlock, and most importantly to herself, that she was not a victim. She was a survivor. She was a winner. She was Eliza Reed, a woman with a past, a wooden leg, and a future that was, for the first time in a long time, bright with hope. The victory was not just a moral one, it was a financial one. The prize money, a substantial sum of $500, was enough to pay off her husband's largest debt and secure her ranch for the foreseeable future. As Eliza stood on the stage, the bank manager, a nervous, sweating man named Mr. Finch, handed her a check with a trembling hand. The crowd roared with approval, and Eliza felt a profound sense of closure. The past, with all its pain and uncertainty, was finally in the rearview mirror. The money in her hand was more than just currency. It was a tangible symbol of her resilience, a physical manifestation of her hard-won victory. She held the check as if it were a fragile bird, a small, beautiful thing she had caught against all odds. The sound of the crowd's cheers was a symphony to her ears, a glorious cacophony of vindication and support. She had faced down a town's prejudice, a man's cruelty, and her own crippling despair, and she had won. But the victory, as all great triumphs do, came with its own set of consequences. As she was leaving the stage, her path was blocked by Silas Hemlock. His face, which had been a picture of smug confidence just moments before, was now a mask of cold, hard fury. He was no longer the smug, condescending bully from before. He was a defeated man, and his defeat had made him a venomous one. He moved with the quiet, menacing grace of a predator, his eyes narrowed into slits of pure hatred. "You're a cheating tramp," he said, his voice a low, ugly snarl that was barely audible over the remaining cheers of the crowd. "And you won't get away with this." His words were a dark stain on her moment of triumph, a final, bitter attempt to snatch her victory away from her. Eliza, her gaze unwavering, looked at him with a quiet, unyielding calm. She was no longer afraid of him. He was a small, pathetic man, his power stripped away by her triumph. "I didn't cheat, Mr. Hemlock. I won, fair and square. The judges saw it, the town saw it, and you saw it. Your pride is a bitter thing, but it's no match for the truth." Her voice, though soft, carried a weight of authority that surprised even her. She had found a new strength, a quiet resolve that came from knowing she had nothing left to lose. Garrett, who had been standing a few feet away, saw the exchange and walked toward them, his face grim. He moved with a quiet, purposeful stride, his presence a solid, unyielding promise of support. "Leave her alone, Hemlock. The game is over." Hemlock ignored him, his gaze fixed on Eliza, his eyes burning with a venomous rage. He was a cornered animal, and he was lashing out. "This isn't over, Mrs. Reed. The bank won't let you keep that money. Your husband had other debts, debts I can make sure they collect on, debts you never even knew he had. They'll take your ranch and I'll be the one to buy it. You think you've won? This is just the beginning of your end." Eliza's heart sank, a cold, sickening lurch in her stomach. She had been so focused on the one debt that she hadn't considered there might be others. Hemlock's words were a cold, calculated threat, a final, desperate attempt to ruin her. The joy she had felt just moments before evaporated, replaced by a chilling certainty that her victory was a fragile, temporary thing. Garrett stepped in front of Eliza, his body a solid wall between her and the man who was now her sworn enemy. "Get out of here, Hemlock," he said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble that was filled with an unyielding anger. "Before I forget myself and teach you a lesson you won't ever forget." Hemlock, seeing the unyielding determination in Garrett's eyes, a man who would not back down, backed down himself. He gave a final, hateful glare at Eliza and walked away, a defeated and broken man, his shoulders slumped in a posture of utter humiliation. Eliza's victory was now tainted. The joy she had felt just moments before was now replaced by a chilling uncertainty. She had won the battle, but the war was far from over. Garrett looked at her, his face filled with concern. What did he mean? Other debts? "Eliza, did your husband have other business dealings?" Eliza shook her head, her mind a frantic blur of fear and confusion. "I don't know. My husband, he was a good man, but he was a dreamer. He had so many plans, so many grand ideas. He always had a new scheme to make our fortune. Maybe there were other things he didn't tell me about. Maybe he didn't want to worry me, or maybe he just didn't want to admit he'd failed." They walked away from the commotion of the rodeo, the cheers of the crowd a hollow sound in her ears. The celebration, the victory, it all felt like a fragile thing, a temporary reprieve from a new and more insidious threat. "We'll face it together, Eliza," Garrett said, his voice filled with a quiet strength that was a balm to her soul. "Whatever it is, we'll face it together." She looked at him, a flicker of hope in her eyes. She had won the rodeo. She had her pride back. But she had also found something she never knew she had lost, a partner, a man who, in the face of immense adversity, had proven to be her most unexpected and loyal ally. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time she didn't feel alone. She had won the money, but she had gained so much more. She had a friend and a future. The day after the rodeo, the silence on Eliza's ranch was a stark contrast to the previous day's celebration. A silence that was now filled with a quiet, creeping dread. The check from the bank sat on her kitchen table, a symbol of her triumph and a reminder of the looming threat. She and Garrett spent the morning at the bank, a grim and difficult meeting that was a world away from the joyous celebration of the day before. The bank manager, a portly man with a nervous twitch, confirmed Silas Hemlock's claim. There were other debts, smaller ones, but they were still significant. Her husband had taken out a few more loans, using the ranch as collateral to fund his ambitious but ultimately failed dreams. He had been a man of grand schemes and big ideas, and he had been undone by his own overconfidence. "The total is, well, it's substantial, Mrs. Reed," the manager said, his voice dripping with condescending sympathy, a hollow, empty sound that offered no comfort. "You've paid off the main debt, but these others, they're due in a few months. If you can't pay them, we'll have no choice but to foreclose." Eliza's heart sank, a heavy, leaden weight in her chest. The rodeo had been her one shot, her one desperate gamble. She had won, and it still wasn't enough. It felt like a cruel cosmic joke, a brutal, unforgiving twist of fate. She had done everything right, had faced down a town and a bully, had won her dignity back, and it still wasn't enough. The truth was a bitter, painful thing, a new enemy she hadn't anticipated. Garrett, ever the pragmatic one, looked at the manager with a cold, hard stare. He saw through the manager's nervous stammering and the carefully constructed lies. He was a man who knew the language of power and manipulation, and he knew Hemlock's game all too well. "Who holds these loans?" he asked, his voice low and menacing. The manager's eyes shifted nervously. They're held by a variety of people, small investors mostly. They're all legitimate." The words were an empty platitude, a transparent attempt to hide the truth. "And who told them to call in the loans?" Garrett asked, his voice a quiet, dangerous rumble. He leaned forward, his hands flat on the manager's desk, his eyes burning with a fierce intensity. "We both know Hemlock has his hands in this. He probably bought up the promissory notes from these small investors, and he's trying to corner her, to force her to sell the ranch. The manager said nothing, his silence a confirmation of Garrett's suspicions. The whole thing was a calculated, insidious plot, a web of deceit designed to take advantage of a vulnerable woman. Hemlock wasn't just a bully. He was a master manipulator, a cruel puppeteer who pulled the strings from behind the scenes. He had set a trap, and she had walked right into it, her rodeo victory a meaningless temporary reprieve. He had anticipated her win, and he had already prepared a new and more sinister way to ruin her. The fight was no longer a simple one. It was a complex, tangled web of financial manipulation and legal deceit, a battle she was ill-equipped to fight alone. Garrett and Eliza left the bank, the truth a bitter pill in their mouths. Silas Hemlock wasn't just a bully. He was a master manipulator. He had set a trap, and she had walked right into it, her rodeo victory a meaningless temporary reprieve. "We have to fight him, Garrett," Eliza said, her voice filled with a quiet fury that was 1,000 times more powerful than her previous despair. "We have to find a way to expose him, to prove he's been buying up these debts just to ruin me. He can't get away with this. Not after everything. Not after he's done this to so many other people." "It won't be easy," Garrett said, his mind already racing with possibilities. "He's a smart man, and he's careful. He won't have left a paper trail. But we have to try. We have to find a way to prove he's a fraud, and we have to do it before he can get his hands on the ranch." The fight had now moved from a physical challenge to a mental one. They were no longer just two people against a bully. They were two people against a powerful, corrupt man, a man who would stop at nothing to get what he wanted. As they rode back to her ranch, the silence between them was no longer comfortable. It was a silence of shared purpose, a quiet resolve that had been forged in the fire of her pain and his quiet support. They had to find a way to win, not just for the ranch, but for every small rancher that had been cheated, every family that had been ruined by men like Silas Hemlock. The rodeo victory had been a beautiful moment of triumph, but the real work, the real fight, was just beginning. It was a fight for her home, her dignity, and her future. And she was going to face it with her head held high, with her partner by her side, and with a heart full of a quiet, unyielding fury. The next few days were a grim and frustrating hunt, a test of their patience and resolve. Eliza and Garrett, now a team in every sense of the word, rode from ranch to ranch, their faces grim with determination, talking to the small-time ranchers who had been forced out of their homes by Silas Hemlock. The stories were all the same, a heartbreaking litany of deceit and manipulation. A small unexpected debt would suddenly become a looming foreclosure, and a man with a slick smile and a generous lowball offer would appear, ready to buy their land for a fraction of its worth. But for all the heartfelt stories and shared frustration, there was no paper trail. Hemlock was meticulous, a master of his dark craft. The sales had been made through various intermediaries, and the promissory notes had been paid off in cash, leaving no direct evidence of his involvement. He was a ghost in the system, a shadow that moved in the dark, and they were trying to catch smoke with their bare hands. Eliza, her hope dwindling with each empty-handed visit, felt the old familiar despair creeping back in. They were fighting a ghost, a man who was a master of manipulation and deceit. "We're never going to find anything, Garrett," she said one afternoon as they sat on her porch, the setting sun casting long shadows across the valley. "He's too smart. He covered his tracks. He knew we'd come looking. He knew the bank wouldn't have the proof. We're fighting a losing battle." The words were filled with a weary, defeated resignation, a stark contrast to the fierce determination that had carried her through the rodeo. Garrett, however, was not one to give up. He had a stubborn streak that was a perfect match for her own, a quiet, unyielding strength that she had come to rely on. "He's not a ghost, Eliza. He's a man, and men make mistakes. He's a powerful man, a proud man, and a greedy one. Men like that always keep their own records. They want to be able to look at what they've done, to count their conquests. He's too arrogant to trust anyone else with his secrets. We just have to find his." He had a plan, a risky, dangerous plan. "He has an office in Salvation," he said, his voice low and serious. "He keeps all his records there, contracts, bills of sale, everything. He has to. He can't trust the bank, not with his personal records. We can go in at night. We can find the evidence. We can expose him." Eliza's heart leaped into her throat. "Break in? Garrett, that's a crime. We'll be arrested. We'll lose everything. Everything we've fought for. The ranch, the victory, all of it. We'll be criminals." The idea was terrifying, a direct violation of the law and the principles she held so dear. It was a leap into the unknown, a complete rejection of everything she had fought to become. "We're going to lose everything anyway," he said, his eyes holding hers with a fierce intensity that mirrored her own determination. "This is our only shot. He's going to get the bank to foreclose on you in a few months. He's going to buy up your ranch, and he's going to do it all over again to someone else. This is our one chance to stop him. We go in, we find the proof, we expose him, and we save your ranch, and we save every other rancher he's ever cheated." Eliza looked at him, her mind a whirlwind of fear and hope. He was right. It was a desperate plan, a last-ditch effort, but it was their only one. She had faced down bullies and wild animals, and she had won. Now she was going to face down a villain in his own lair. The fear was still there, but it was now a distant hum beneath the fierce burning fire of her resolve. "All right," she said, her voice filled with a quiet, unyielding resolve. "When do we go?" A rare, triumphant smile spread across Garrett's face. "Tonight," he said. "Tonight we get our proof. Tonight we end this." The darkness that fell over Salvation was a different kind of darkness. It was a conspiratorial darkness, a silent accomplice to their plan. They rode into town, two shadows on horseback, their faces grim and their hearts full of a determined, desperate hope. They tethered their horses in a hidden alley and approached Hemlock's office, a small, unassuming building with a single, grimy window. The air was thick with the scent of old paper and dust. They had to be quick. Hemlock would be back in the morning. They had to find what they were looking for, or they would lose their one chance. Eliza, her wooden leg a silent thud on the floorboards, began to search. Garrett, his movements quick and efficient, searched the desk, his eyes scanning every document. They were a team, a well-oiled machine, working toward a single, shared purpose. Then Garrett found it, a hidden drawer, a false bottom in the desk. He pulled it open, and inside, a small, leather-bound book. He opened it, his eyes widening with triumph. It was a personal ledger. Not for the bank, not for the investors, but for him. A meticulous, detailed record of every debt he had bought, every rancher he had cheated, every lie he had told. It was all there. A paper trail a mile long, a smoking gun. Eliza, her heart pounding with a wild, triumphant rhythm, looked at him, a look of pure, unadulterated relief on her face. They had done it. They had found the proof. They had won. The night was their silent accomplice, and in its darkness they had found the light that would finally set them free. The next morning, the town of Salvation was a hive of activity, a palpable buzz of excitement and anticipation. Word of Eliza's triumph at the rodeo had spread, and now a new rumor was circulating. A rumor of a stolen ledger, a secret book of lies, and a reckoning that was about to unfold in the court of law. The people, who had once been so quick to judge Eliza, were now filled with a mixture of hope and vengeful justice. The courthouse, a small dusty building, was packed to the rafters. Every rancher who had lost his land, every family who had been cheated, every person who had been a victim of Silas Hemlock's greed was there. Silas Hemlock sat at the defendant's table, his face a mask of arrogant confidence. He saw them, and a look of pure, unadulterated fury crossed his face, a silent promise of retribution. The trial was a tense and dramatic affair, a battle of wills and a test of the community's moral fabric. The town judge, a fair and honest man with a kind face and a stern demeanor, presided over the proceedings. Eliza, her voice clear and strong, told her story. She spoke of the rodeo, the victory, the sudden debts, and the chilling encounter with Hemlock. She held up the ledger for the judge to see, a small, unassuming book that held a world of lies. Her testimony was a powerful indictment of Hemlock's character, a vivid account of the pain and suffering he had inflicted on her and on the community. Silas Hemlock's lawyer, a slick, expensive man from the city, tried to discredit her. He called her a liar, a thief, a desperate woman who had fabricated a story to get out of her debts. He used every legal trick in the book, every lie, every misdirection, to try and turn the tide of public opinion against her. But then, Garrett Stone took the stand. His testimony was powerful and unwavering. He spoke of Hemlock's threats, of the man's attempt to sabotage Eliza's horse, of the way he had tried to take advantage of a woman who had already lost so much. He spoke of the night they had found the ledger, of the fear and the hope that had driven them. His words were a powerful counterpoint to the lawyer's empty rhetoric, a testament to the truth that lay hidden beneath the surface. He was a man of few words, but every word he spoke was filled with a quiet, unyielding conviction. The climax of the trial came when the judge, his face grim, opened the ledger. He read from it, his voice a low, somber sound, a litany of every lie, every cheated rancher, every false promise. The evidence was irrefutable. Hemlock's lies were exposed, his web of deceit unraveled for all to see. Silas Hemlock's face, which had been so confident just moments before, turned to a pale, sickly white. His lies, his carefully constructed world of power and greed, had been exposed by a woman he had dismissed as a cripple. The judge, his voice filled with a quiet authority, looked at Hemlock. "Silas Hemlock, you have been found guilty of fraud, conspiracy, and racketeering. You have taken advantage of the good people of this valley for your own selfish gain. I hereby sentence you to 10 years in prison, and I hereby order that all the lands you have stolen be returned to their rightful owners." A roar of applause erupted in the courtroom. The ranchers, the families, the people who had been cheated and wronged rose to their feet, their faces filled with a mixture of relief and triumph. They had been given a second chance. And they owed it all to a woman with a wooden leg. As Hemlock was led away in handcuffs, his face a mask of defeat and rage, he gave Eliza one final, hateful glare, but it no longer held any power. He was a defeated man, and she was a victor. She had won the rodeo. She had won her ranch, and she had won back her dignity. Eliza walked out of the courtroom, the cheers of the crowd a symphony of celebration. Garrett was there, his hand resting lightly on her back, his presence a silent promise of a future that was, for the first time in a long time, bright with hope. She had won. She had won it all. The pain, the humiliation, the struggle, it was all worth it. She was a winner. She was a hero. She was a survivor. The days that followed were a whirlwind of activity, a joyous celebration of a community reborn. The ranchers who had lost their land were overjoyed, a sense of relief and gratitude palpable in the air. The entire community of Salvation rallied around Eliza, a new and profound respect in their eyes. She was no longer just the disabled widow. She was the woman who had brought down the man who had cheated them all. Eliza was a hero, a living legend, a symbol of hope and defiance. But in the quiet moments, she was just a woman with a ranch to run and a heart that was slowly, tentatively beginning to heal. Her ranch, which had been so broken and desolate just a few months before, was now a place of hope and new beginnings. The ranchers who had been wronged came to help her, a community rallying around its newfound hero. They helped her fix her fences, repair her barn, and tend to her cattle. It was a beautiful, humbling experience, a testament to the power of a single act of courage. In the midst of all the chaos, Garrett was a constant presence, a steady, unwavering anchor in her life. He was no longer just a partner in a fight, he was a partner in her life. He came every day not just to help with the chores but to talk, to laugh, and to simply be with her. The old, arrogant rancher was gone, replaced by a kind, patient man who had been humbled and changed by her strength. He had a deep, profound respect for her, a respect that had been forged in the crucible of their shared struggle. Their relationship was a quiet, unspoken thing, a language of shared glances and gentle touches. One evening, as they sat on her porch, watching the sun set, a comfortable silence settled between them. The air was filled with the scent of blooming wildflowers and the soft murmur of her cattle. "You know," Garrett said, his voice a low, thoughtful rumble, I owe you a debt of gratitude, Eliza. She looked at him, surprised. For what? You helped me. You did so much for me. He shook his head, a small, sad smile on his face. I was a different man back then. I was full of pride and arrogance. I thought I knew everything. I thought I was better than everyone else. But you showed me what real strength is. You showed me what it's like to be truly brave. You changed me, Eliza. She reached out and gently placed her hand on his. The gesture was tentative, but her touch was a testament to the trust they had built. You helped me, Garrett. You had every reason to walk away, to leave me to my fate. But you didn't. You stood by me. You fought for me. And you taught me that I was worth fighting for. He turned his hand, his fingers intertwining with hers. He looked at her, his eyes filled with a quiet, profound emotion. You're more than worth it, Eliza. You're the strongest, bravest, most beautiful person I have ever known. And I don't want to go back to my empty ranch. I don't want to go back to being that man. I want to stay here, with you. The words hung in the air, a silent, powerful promise. It was not a grand declaration of love. It was something more. It was a promise of a future of quiet moments, of shared chores, of a life built on a foundation of respect, trust, and a love that had grown from the ashes of a cruel public humiliation. Eliza, her heart swelling with a happiness she never thought she would feel again, looked at him, her eyes filled with unshed tears. Garrett, she said, her voice a soft, loving whisper, I think I'd like that very much. The sun set on the horizon, painting the sky in a blaze of colors, a beautiful backdrop to a new and quiet beginning. The old ranch, the lonely woman, the arrogant rancher, they were all in the past. In their place was a new life, a new home, and a new kind of love. It was not a fairy tale, but it was real. And in the rugged, beautiful world of the Old West, that was all that mattered. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of activity and shared purpose, transforming Eliza's small ranch from a place of lonely struggle into a beacon of communal effort and newfound hope. The men who had come to help her weren't just hired hands, they were neighbors and friends, men who had been wronged by Silas Hemlock and now saw in Eliza's victory a chance at their own redemption. Their labor was a shared act of defiance, a quiet rejection of the greed that had so long held their community in its grasp. They mended fences with a renewed sense of purpose, not for payment alone, but to strengthen the very fabric of their community. The barn, which had leaned precariously for months, was now straightened and reinforced, a symbol of stability and resilience. New cattle, bought with a portion of the prize money, grazed on the revitalized land, their presence a living testament to Eliza's hard-won triumph. The work was still demanding, with sun-up to sundown hours and the constant threat of a harsh, unforgiving landscape, but it was no longer a desperate fight for survival. It was a shared labor of love and mutual respect, a daily ritual that reinforced their growing bond. Garrett remained a constant presence, his visits so frequent and seamless that they became the natural rhythm of her days. He still had his sprawling ranch to manage, a world of vast, open spaces and endless work, but his focus had shifted. His empty lands no longer held the same appeal. He found more meaning in the laughter and camaraderie that filled Eliza's small, bustling homestead, and most of all, in the quiet strength of the woman who had captivated his heart. Their relationship deepened, moving beyond the shared ordeal and into a quiet, unspoken language of shared glances and gentle touches. He taught her more about ranching, not just the practical skills, but the deeper wisdom of the land he knew and loved. She, in turn, showed him a different kind of strength, one built not on power and wealth, but on unwavering resilience and profound compassion. She taught him about the small details of life on a homestead, the importance of tending to a vegetable garden with patience, of mending a quilt with care, and of finding joy in the simple, everyday moments. One evening, as they sat on her porch, the air fragrant with the scent of damp earth after a passing rain shower, a comfortable silence stretched between them. The sound was a soothing rhythm, a peaceful counterpoint to the hurried, desperate days of the past. "I never thought I'd feel this way again," Eliza said, her voice soft and full of wonder. "I thought after my husband, After the accident, I thought I was broken. Garrett reached out and took her hand, his thumb tracing the calloused lines on her palm. You were never broken, Eliza. You were just bruised, and you needed time to heal. You're the strongest person I know. You faced down a bully and you won. You showed me what true courage is. She looked at him, and in his eyes she saw not pity but a profound and humbling respect. He didn't see her as a victim or a cripple. He saw her as a woman, a partner, an equal. The wooden leg, the symbol of her past pain, was now simply a part of her, a testament to the life she had lived and the battles she had won. And you, she said, her voice filled with emotion. You taught me that not all people are cruel. You taught me to trust again. He smiled, a quiet, gentle smile that reached his eyes. We all have our lessons to learn, Eliza. Mine was that a man's worth isn't measured by his wealth, but by his heart. And I found my heart out here, with you. He leaned in and gently, tentatively kissed her. It was a kiss of shared pain and shared triumph, a promise of a future built on a foundation of trust, respect, and an unspoken love that had grown from the most unexpected of places. The lonely ranch was no longer lonely. It was a home. And the two people who had once been strangers, bound by a cruel twist of fate, were now two souls, forever intertwined, ready to face the future together. The joy and peace of their new life were profound, but the past was not so easily forgotten. The physical and emotional scars of Eliza's accident and the subsequent years of struggle still remained, a quiet presence in their daily lives. The memory of the pain, the loneliness, and the fear was a part of her, and sometimes it would resurface in the most unexpected ways. One afternoon, as she and Garrett were working in the barn, the quiet hum of their peaceful existence was abruptly shattered. Eliza was carrying a heavy bucket of feed, her wooden leg a familiar weight against her muscles, when a loose floorboard in the old barn caught her prosthetic. She lost her balance, and in a jarring moment of helplessness the bucket went flying, its contents spilling all over the dusty floor. The pain in her stump, a phantom ache that had been with her for years, flared up with a sudden, sharp intensity. She let out a cry of frustration and pain, sinking to the ground, tears of anger and despair stinging her eyes. It was more than just physical pain. It was the sting of humiliation, the echo of every cruel word she had ever heard about her disability, the raw, visceral feeling of being incomplete. Garrett was by her side in an instant, his face a mask of concern. He didn't rush to pick up the spilled feed or to fix the floorboard. He simply knelt beside her, his presence a quiet, calming anchor. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice low and gentle, understanding that the question wasn't just about her physical state. "I'm fine," she said, her voice tight with a mixture of pain and shame. She felt exposed, vulnerable, her limitations laid bare for him to see. I can't do it sometimes. It's too hard. This leg, it's a constant reminder of everything." Her frustration was a tangible thing, a raw wave of emotion that she had held back for so long. She felt the weight of her past, the years of pain and solitude pressing down on her once more. Garrett sat on the ground beside her, not saying a word, just allowing her to feel the full weight of her frustration. He knew that for all her strength, she was still human. The physical pain was real and the emotional scars were just as deep. "I hate it," she said, her voice choked with emotion. "I hate this leg. I hate that I'm not whole. I hate that I have to live with this forever." The words were a bitter admission, a cry from the depths of her soul. She had come so far, but in moments like this, the old pain would rise up, and she would feel like a broken, defeated woman again. Garrett reached out and gently touched her wooden leg, his touch so respectful and gentle that it took her breath away. "Eliza," he said, his voice quiet, "that leg, it's not a symbol of what you lost. It's a symbol of what you survived. It's a part of you, just like your courage and your heart and your beautiful stubborn spirit." He paused, his eyes holding hers with a deep and profound love. "I don't love you despite it, Eliza. I love you because of it. It's a part of what makes you who you are, and I wouldn't change a thing." His words were a balm to her soul, a profound act of acceptance that transcended anything she had ever experienced. She looked at him, and in his eyes she saw a man who saw her, truly saw her, for all her flaws and all her triumphs. He didn't see a broken woman. He saw a whole one, a woman who had been through hell and had come out the other side stronger and more beautiful than ever. She leaned into him, her head resting on his shoulder. "Thank you," she whispered. The words filled with a love and a gratitude that were 1,000 times more profound than anything she had ever felt before. The scars, both physical and emotional, were still there, but for the first time they didn't feel like a curse. They felt like a testament to a life lived with courage, a love found in the most unexpected of places, and a future that was, for the first time in a long time, full of hope and promise. The slow, steady rhythm of their shared life continued, a tapestry woven with hard work, quiet moments, and a love that was growing stronger with each passing day. The ranch, once a place of sorrow and solitude, was now a vibrant hub of activity, a beacon of hope in the valley. The sounds of hammers mending fences, the lowing of cattle, and the soft murmur of their shared conversations filled the air. Eliza was no longer defined by her past as the broken widow, and Garrett was no longer defined by his arrogance. They were two people, whole and healed, ready to face the future together. Their relationship, built on a foundation of respect and shared purpose, was a living embodiment of the fact that true strength lies not in perfection, but in resilience, not in a smooth, easy path, but in the courage to walk a difficult one. Their days were a peaceful counterpoint to the hurried, desperate days of the past, filled with the simple joys of a shared life. They would work side by side in the fields, their movements a fluid, synchronized dance born of a deep understanding of one another. They would sit on the porch in the evenings watching the sun set, the silence between them no longer awkward or filled with unspoken anxieties, but a comfortable, intimate language of two hearts beating as one. It was in these quiet moments that the truest parts of their souls were revealed, stripped of pretense and past hurts. One afternoon, as they were sitting on the porch, a quiet rain began to fall, a gentle blessing on the dry, thirsty land. The sound was a soothing rhythm, a peaceful counterpoint to the hurried, desperate days of the past. The rain, once a source of anxiety and fear during the long, dry spells, was now a welcome presence, a symbol of the abundance and peace they had found. It was a cleansing rain, washing away the final vestiges of the pain and humiliation that had defined so much of Eliza's life. Eliza looked at Garrett, a quiet, hopeful look in her eyes. "I've been thinking," she said, her voice soft, the sound barely audible over the gentle patter of raindrops, "about the future, about us." The word us hung in the air, a fragile, beautiful thing. Garrett turned to her, his face filled with a quiet, loving anticipation that mirrored her own. "What about us, Eliza?" he asked, his voice a low, encouraging rumble. "My ranch, it's a good ranch," she began, the words coming slowly at first, as if testing the weight of them. "It's small, but it's been my home. It's the place where I found my strength again. But your ranch, it's so much bigger. You have so much land, and I have so much knowledge now about how to make things grow, about how to survive, about how to run things with a good and honest heart." She took a deep breath, the words now coming out in a rush, a testament to the bold new vision taking shape in her mind. It was a vision born not of desperation, but of empowered ambition. What if we combined them? What if we worked together? We could create something amazing, something that would last for generations, a new kind of ranch, a new kind of family, a new kind of life, a legacy built on honesty and respect, not on greed and manipulation. The proposal was not just a business venture. It was a deeply personal invitation, a request for him to join her in building a life that was a rebuke to everything Silas Hemlock stood for. Garrett was silent for a long moment, his eyes fixed on hers, a whirlwind of emotions swirling within him. He had spent his life building an empire, but it had always felt empty. He had the land, the wealth, the power, but he had never had a partner, a true, honest, and equal partner. He had been a lonely king of a vast empty domain. Now a woman who had every reason to distrust him was offering him a share in a new kind of kingdom, a partnership built on a foundation of mutual trust and respect. She had faced down bullies and corrupt businessmen, and now she was asking for something more. She was asking for a partnership, a true, honest, and equal partnership, a chance to build something not just for themselves, but for their community, a life that was an antidote to the poison of Silas Hemlock. He smiled, a wide, genuine smile that reached his eyes, crinkling them at the corners. "I can't think of anything I would want more," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I have the land, you have the heart. We can do anything, Eliza, anything." Their hands, which had so often touched in moments of comfort and shared labor, now clasped together in a silent, powerful promise. It was not just a business venture, it was a promise of a future that was not about a man and a woman, but about two partners, two equals, two souls, who had found their way back to each other and to themselves. The rain fell, a gentle, cleansing presence. The future was no longer a scary, uncertain thing. It was a blank canvas, a new beginning, waiting to be painted by two people who had found their way through the darkness and into the light. The journey had been long and painful, but the destination was more beautiful and more profound than they could have ever imagined. The weeks that followed were filled with the joyful chaos of two ranches becoming one, a sprawling, beautiful mess of shared purpose and building a future. Garrett's sprawling land and Eliza's small, well-tended homestead were combined into a single, cohesive unit, a living embodiment of their partnership. They worked side by side, their movements a fluid, synchronized dance born of mutual respect and understanding. He brought his knowledge of large-scale ranching and business, the big-picture logistics of managing vast herds and complex markets. She brought her expertise in small-scale farming, her unwavering resilience, and her profound understanding of the human heart, the kind of wisdom that knows a fence needs to be mended with care and a steer needs to be treated with a gentle hand. Their partnership was not just about business, it was about building a life, a family, and a new kind of community. The ranch became a model of sustainable ethical agriculture, a place where a man's word was his bond, and a hand-up was more valuable than a handout. They built a new, bigger house, a home that was a testament to their shared dream. It wasn't a showy mansion, but a sturdy, comfortable structure, with a wide, welcoming porch and a kitchen that was the heart of the home. It was a place filled with the sound of laughter, the scent of freshly baked bread, and the quiet, steady rhythm of two hearts beating as one. The house was not ostentatious or showy. It was built for comfort, for family, for a life lived with purpose and joy. It had a big fireplace for cold winter nights, and large windows that looked out onto the endless fields, a constant reminder of the beautiful world they had built together. The community, which had once been so skeptical of their relationship, now saw them as a symbol of hope. A woman who had been publicly humiliated had found a way to win. A man who had been defined by his arrogance had found a way to be kind. Their story was a legend, a testament to the power of forgiveness, resilience, and an unexpected love. They were a living, breathing testament to the fact that a person's character is not set in stone, and that a community, when it comes together, can be a powerful force for good. The ranchers who had been wronged by Hemlock now worked for them, a new family forged in the fire of shared struggle and shared triumph. The children of the town would come to the ranch to play, to learn, to listen to the stories of the rodeo, the bully, and the two people who had changed the valley forever. One afternoon, as they were sitting on the porch of their new home, a small, quiet moment of peace settled between them. The sun was setting, painting the sky in a blaze of fiery colors. The ranch, their ranch, was a picture of prosperity and peace, a living monument to their shared vision. "Look at this, Garrett," Eliza said, her voice filled with awe. "We did this. We built this. From nothing." He smiled, his gaze fixed on her. "It wasn't nothing, Eliza. We had a foundation. A good one. We had a broken-down ranch, a one-legged widow and a lonely man, and we had a dream, and we had a lot of heart." He reached out and took her hand, his touch a silent promise of a future that would last for generations. "This isn't just a ranch, Eliza. It's a legacy. It's a legacy of what a person can do when they're not afraid to be who they are. It's a legacy of what a community can do when they stand together. And it's a legacy of what two people can do when they love each other, and when they build something real and lasting out of the ashes of their pasts. Eliza leaned into him, a single tear of joy and gratitude tracking a path down her face. She had lost so much, but she had gained so much more. She had lost her husband, her ranch, her sense of self, but she had found a new life, a new home, a new love, and a new sense of purpose. The journey had been long and painful, but the destination was more beautiful and more profound than she could have ever imagined. The sun set on the horizon, a beautiful, fiery end to a long and beautiful day. Their life was not a fairy tale, but it was real. And in the rugged, beautiful world of the Old West, that was all that mattered. Years passed, and the ranch prospered beyond their wildest dreams, a living testament to the power of a shared dream. Garrett and Eliza were a true testament to the power of a shared dream. They had built a life, a family, and a legacy that would last for generations. The ranch was a hub of activity, a beacon of hope and prosperity in the valley, a place where people came to work, to learn, and to be inspired by their story. They were a force to be reckoned with, a partnership built on a foundation of mutual respect and an unwavering love. Their two boys, strong and hard-working, and their little girl with her mother's quiet resilience and her father's kind eyes, grew up to be a living testament to their parents' journey. They learned about the land, about hard work, and most importantly, about the power of kindness and forgiveness. They learned that a person's worth is not measured by their wealth, but by their character, and that a family is not just a group of people, but a circle of love and support. Eliza, who had once been so hesitant to show her vulnerability, now walked with a quiet confidence that radiated from within. Her wooden leg, once a source of shame, was now a symbol of her strength, a testament to the life she had lived and the battles she had won. She was a leader, a mentor, and a friend to all who knew her, a wise and kind woman who had a listening ear for anyone in need. She taught the young women of the community how to manage their finances, how to stand up for themselves, and how to find their own quiet strength. Garrett, who had once been so full of arrogance, was now a man of quiet dignity and profound compassion. He was a good husband, a good rancher, and a good man. He had learned that true power came not from domination, but from service. He had found his purpose in building a life with the woman he loved, and in giving back to the community that had given him a second chance. He was a living example of the transformative power of love and humility, a man who had traded his pride for a life of purpose and joy. One afternoon, as they were sitting on the porch, a quiet, peaceful moment of reflection settled between them. The sun was setting, casting a warm, golden glow over the valley, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The sounds of their children playing in the distance filled the air, a symphony of a life well lived. Eliza looked at Garrett, her eyes filled with a lifetime of love and gratitude. "Remember the day we met?" she said, her voice filled with a gentle, loving humor. "The day you laughed at my wooden leg?" Garrett's face softened, a small, sad smile on his lips. "I remember," he said, his voice quiet. "It was the day I made the biggest mistake of my life, and the day I began to change for the better. You showed me the man I could be, Eliza, and I'll never be able to thank you enough for that." She reached out and took his hand, her touch a silent promise of a future that was forever tied to the past. "I remember that day too," she said, her voice filled with a quiet love. "I remember the pain. But I also remember the moment you came back. The moment you offered to help. It was the day I started to believe in miracles again. You were my miracle, Garrett." The sun set on the horizon, a beautiful, fiery end to a long and beautiful day. Their life was not a fairy tale, but it was real. It was a story of a one-legged widow and a rancher, a story of a cruel laugh and a changed heart, a story of a community that found its way back to itself. It was a story of two people who had found their way through the darkness and into the light. It was a story of a new beginning, a shared dream, and a love that would last a lifetime. their own small, beautiful miracle in the heart of the Old West. And as the night fell and the stars began to appear, they sat there, two souls, forever intertwined, a living testament to the fact that even in the most unforgiving of worlds, love, courage, and a shared dream can build a legacy that will last forever.